If you want to be a part of history in the making or experience a sense of community far bigger than yourself, then stick around to find out why sports should be the catalyst for your next adventure abroad. So the 2026 FIFA World Cup just came to an end, and the 2028 Olympics are fast approaching, so that's why we're talking to travel-loving senior writer Laura McFarland today about traveling in the name of sports. She actually wrote a piece titled, "I Plan My Trips Abroad Around Sports Events. Here's Why You Should Too." And CNN actually reached out to Laura to interview her about this article in December of last year, which is very cool. We'll have that linked in the show notes. So Laura has attended multiple World Cup games, the Australia Open tennis tournament, and the European Football Championship. So Laura, you've obviously traveled far and wide for sports. To start, what are your top 5 tips for someone traveling for sports?
Oh, this is a great question. Well, I am very excited to be here and so excited I get to talk about genuinely my 2 favorite things in the world, which are sports and traveling abroad. So my top 5 tips for sports-related travel would be, number 1, plan ahead. You can totally go to games on a whim. It's possible, but things will be much cheaper if you buy tickets and buy accommodation at least 6 months to a year in advance of a major tournament. Number 2, bandwagon. Just cheer for the local team. It's way more fun. When I went to Australia for the Women's World Cup, I ended up going to a bunch of the games where the Australia women's team was playing. I bought this sick jersey that says Australia on it.
Love it.
And I just had way more fun because I was with 80,000 other people that lived in that country and were there to see that team play. And I just honestly had such a good time just kind of rooting for the local team of whatever country I was in and whatever sports game I was watching. So number 2 tip is bandwagon, and don't feel bad about it. My number 3 tip would be that sports-related travel doesn't necessarily need to just mean famous major international tournaments. It can also mean attending local sports games in whatever country you just happen to be visiting. And local sports are great because the tickets are usually really cheap or really affordable, and then you don't run into any kind of accommodation or traffic issues that come with a major sports event. And that actually leads really well into my 4th tip, which is lean into whatever sport is popular in the country that you're visiting. So for example, if you're an American tourist, chances are you probably haven't watched very much rugby or cricket because those sports aren't super popular here in the US. But if you're visiting a country like Australia or South Africa or India, rugby and cricket are some of the most popular sports there. So do some research in advance and keep an open mind to what sports you might be interested in and try to find something that's really popular in the country that you're visiting. And then my 5th tip would be consider it even if you're not a big sports fan. I feel like there's this sense that you have to be really sports crazy in order to go to a sports game abroad. You don't. I'm not someone who watches sports religiously by any means. I just think it's a really fun way to get to know the country and have a super, super unique experience when you're traveling. So consider it. You'll be surprised.
All great tips. Thank you so much for sharing that. Can you define what sports tourism is?
I think that most people would define sports tourism as traveling to another place specifically to attend a sporting match or tournament. I think my definition is a bit broader. I think that sports tourism can just mean engaging with a country or city's sports culture, whether that's attending a match or even just going to a local pub down the road to watch the big game or whatever game is currently being played.
So where have you traveled for sports?
I will say that my first experience with sports tourism was a total accident, and I did not travel here with the intention of getting really into sports. So that being said, I did a big backpacking trip around Croatia in 2018. That was the same summer that the World Cup was happening, and the World Cup was happening in Russia. I was nowhere near any of the games that were being played, but for anyone who remembers the 2018 World Cup, Croatia actually ended up going to the final, and this was the first time in the history of the country that Croatia has ever reached a World Cup final. So when I was traveling around Croatia, I started just watching some of the Croatia games because it was like the event that everyone in the town would go to the bar to go watch the World Cup game and whatever was happening. So we ended up watching all of the knockout round games and then the quarterfinal and then the semifinal, and then they made it to the final, and it was just like everyone in the town that I was traveling in at the time, which is a super small town on the coast with 4,000 people. Genuinely every single person was at the bar watching that semifinal game against England. And it was I was so hooked. I just knew this is something that's so unique. I didn't even know that the World Cup was happening that summer that I was there. And then all of a sudden I was like, this is the best travel experience I have ever had. After that, I knew that I wanted to start incorporating watching sports or paying attention to sports in whatever international travels I did in the future. So I went to the 2023 Women's World Cup in Australia, and then I went to the Australian Open, which is a major tennis tournament, a few months after that. And then I ended up traveling around Europe while the Euro was happening. And the Euro is a super major soccer tournament, football, as they say in Europe, that happens every 4 years. And then I've also been to a few World Cup games here in San Francisco over this past summer while the World Cup was happening on US soil, but that's not really travel, but it is just really fun. So I'll give a brief explanation of what each trip was about. So my 2023 Women's World Cup trip, I went to Australia and I went to 7 games all in Sydney over the course of 1 month. I bought tickets about a year and a half in advance. I planned my accommodation really far in advance. And this was the trip that I would say was me traveling specifically for a sporting event. The Australian Open, on the other hand, we just happened to be in Melbourne where the Australian Open takes place while the Australian Open was happening. And so I did not plan this in advance. I wasn't thinking that I was going to try to go to any games because I had this perception that tennis tournaments are very expensive. I thought tennis was a rich person sport. I was wrong. You can buy a stadium pass the day before for like $60.
Really?
And it was so much fun. So my partner and I ended up buying 2 tickets to go to just a full day of the Australian Open and just wandered around. We got to go into a few different stadiums where different matches were taking place. We didn't get to go see any of the really major and really famous people, but we were in the stadium for the whole time, and it was a blast. And I would highly, highly recommend trying to attend one of the Opens if you're in anywhere where a tennis open is taking place. And then finally, I was in Europe during the summer of 2024 while the Euro was taking place. The Euro happened in Germany that year. I didn't go to any games. I just made sure that I was in Europe at the same time because I really wanted to watch the games of whatever country I was in. So for example, I was backpacking around Scotland and I went to the local pub when Scotland was having one of their games and watched one of the Scotland games with a ton of other people around me. And it was super fun, super cheap, and requires like 2 minutes of planning. You literally just Google, when is this country playing? And then you go to and you find a bar and you watch that country play.
Sounds like so much fun. So some of these things, like the things on a really big global scale, like the FIFA World Cup, and say if you're going to the Olympics, it seems like those absolutely require tons of pre-planning up to a year in advance, accommodations, travel, tickets, and then some things you can go to just on a whim, like you said, which is awesome. So in that same vein of preparation, what is the first step of the process when you decide that you're going to travel for sports?
The first step, if it's a major tournament like a World Cup or the European Championship or the Olympics, I am planning a year and a half in advance minimum. The first thing that you have to do is research when tickets are being released, because for a major tournament, tickets usually come out in a lottery system. So for example, when I was trying to go to some of the most recent World Cup games here in the US, those tickets went on sale about a year ago, I think, but I had to register for the lottery about a year and a half ago. So you just Google tickets and then you find wherever the lottery is happening. Usually it'll be on like the LA 2028 Olympics website or the FIFA World Cup 2026 website. And then you just enter in your email and say, I want to be considered for lottery tickets. And then they will email you if you get a slot where in the lottery where you can actually apply to then buy tickets. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. The most important thing is just to do it as far in advance as possible. And so I would start thinking about it at least a year and a half in advance and just look at what you need to do to get tickets.
So with those lottery processes, do you happen to know if you're always going to get like a time slot? It's just a matter of which time slot, or are there some people who don't even get to be entered into the lottery to get tickets? So if there's something that you're absolutely dying to go to, there's a chance you may not even be able to get tickets?
No, you are not guaranteed a time slot if you enter the lottery. Entering the lottery is to see if you even get the chance to purchase tickets. I would say one caveat to this is that my experience in the ticket lottery was for the Women's World Cup. I know people that had to enter the ticket lottery for the Men's World Cup and never got chosen. For the Women's World Cup, I entered the ticket lottery and got a notification almost the next day that I was able to buy tickets. So I would say that there is a difference in terms of major tournaments between men's and women's tournaments, and that is unfortunate. Mm-hmm. But also there are some perks, like the Women's World Cup is much more affordable and much more accessible.
Yeah, and I'm sure same for Olympic events, men's and women's, depends on the event. When I was looking at the LA 28 Olympics. The gymnastics team, the women's gymnastics team, all the tickets were selling for about $1,000 plus, and that's even if you got into the lottery before those sold out. And then the men's gymnastics was around like $300. So yeah, crazy how different those price points can be. But if you're not super set on a specific event or a specific team, you can get some really great deals, which is a good thing.
So for a major tournament, the second that you have your tickets, start looking into accommodation. This will be the quickest thing to go, so you want to do it as soon as possible. You should plan to stay somewhere either near the stadium where you are attending the game or near public transit to the stadium. And that leads us to our next step, which is look into the public transit. Driving is not going to be your friend. Traffic is awful. There's usually a parking pass situation that just adds another hundreds of dollars on top of your ticket already. Public transit is going to be your cheapest and quickest way to get from your accommodation to the game. So I'm looking at public transit before I book accommodation or at the same time that I'm trying to book accommodation, because I want to book a hotel that is close enough to public transit that I can easily access the game that I'm there to see and then go back to my hotel. So then once you have your tickets, accommodation, and public transit figured out, then you can relax a bit. That is the stuff that you should do at least a year in advance. But then in the year leading up to your trip, start looking into all the other things that you would do for a normal international trip. Look into your visa situation. Do you need a visa to get into the country where you're traveling to? What's the safety like? What's the food like? Start to build your budget. Things can get really expensive at a major tournament, so you should plan in advance for food is going to be expensive, drinks are going to be expensive. If you're someone who wants to keep a budget for that trip, I would recommend making it before the game, because I know I've walked into a game and said, I'm not going to spend a lot of money here. And then I buy 2 beers and it's $80. And there goes my budget for the next week. So definitely plan this out ahead of time if you can, and know that things will be expensive, especially in a major tournament.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They get you. Yeah, one of my good friends just came to town for the World Cup games in LA and ended up staying in an area that was about 15 minutes from the stadium. And when it came time to take an Uber, it actually ended up taking more like an hour because of traffic.
Yeah.
Classic LA. And it was like $120 Uber for that. But imagine if he'd been staying 30 minutes away, it would have been so much worse. So I think that's so important to stay close to the games, and hopefully the place that you're going has good public transportation and you can save in that way. But yeah, it takes a lot of the headache out of it if you don't have to make a day-long trek to get there.
Now, all of this is advice specifically for a major sports tournament. If I'm visiting a country just on a general travel trip and I want to figure out how I can incorporate some kind of sports culture into that trip, then a few weeks before I go, I'll start to research what kind of sports I could possibly see there. So what's currently in season? There's sports aren't year round. Like, for example, here in the US, our baseball season is April to October. That's only half the year. If you visit the US in January and you're really excited to go to a baseball game, you're kind of out of luck. So research what's in season. Who are the popular teams? What are the iconic stadiums that you just have to go if you're a really big sports fan? What do people in that country get really excited about? For example, I was in Australia for a while between the World Cup and the Australian Open. I traveled around the country. I had a wonderful time. I was there for 6 months. I was there during the Australian Football League season. That is basically Australia's version of, I can't even describe it. It's the coolest sport I've ever seen in my entire life. If you're in Australia, go to an AFL game. It's awesome. But I was in Australia when AFL was in season. That is a huge, huge, huge sport in Australia. People love it. And so I made sure that I knew when the playoffs were happening. And I went and I watched the final at a local sports bar when I was in the Gold Coast. And it was like one of the most fun days I've ever had on a trip. I was just talking with a bunch of other Aussies around me, and we were all watching this game, and I did not know either of the teams, and I knew nothing about the sport, but I was having a blast. And so definitely research what kind of sports are happening in the country, but you don't need to do that like years in advance. You can literally just look it up like a week in advance before your trip and figure out if there's anything you could do while you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. Good tip. Sports are seasonal, so it's going to differ depending on when you visit. All right. So do you usually plan your trip around the sporting event, or do you kind of make it an excursion, which you kind of touched on this, but if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would say both. I mean, the whole reason that I went to Australia was, again, because I had tickets to the Women's World Cup. And then I just tacked on a bunch of travel afterwards because I figured while I'm there, I might as well see more of Australia besides just Sydney. But then this was really something that made me start paying attention to what sports are happening when I'm traveling. So, for example, after Australia, I traveled around Southeast Asia for a bit, and then I went up to Europe. And when I was in London, I ended up going to see a Premier League game, even though that wasn't the point of my trip there. I just was in London for a few days, traveling, going around, seeing the sights. And I just wanted to go see some of the local sports culture. And a Premier League, like Premier League is very, very big in England. It's soccer or football. But I think the biggest difference with going to see sports when you're traveling is that it's something that local people care about. It's like going to London to see Buckingham Palace is iconic. You have to do it, but you're going to be surrounded by mostly international tourists while you're there, versus going to Wembley Stadium or Stamford Bridge to go watch one of the London Premier League teams play. And it's on a Tuesday night and you're there with all of the other London locals who are getting off of work and going to the game, because that's just what you do when you live in London, is you go to Premier League games. So I think it's a really great way to just kind of integrate yourself a little bit more and get this really unique experience that a lot of international tourists kind of look over and don't really think to do.
Yeah, that's such a great point. That's definitely one of the best ways to interact with the locals. So what are some of the key factors for a successful experience at these events? And what is something that might be a little bit more difficult to figure out?
I feel like I've touched on this a little bit throughout the podcast, but each country has a unique sports culture, and you should research it the way that you would research what museums to go to or what national landmarks to visit. You'll meet way more locals and get a feel for what the country is actually like at a local sports event, more so than you would going to a tourist attraction. In terms of key factors for success going to a major tournament, just plan far in advance. Traffic is going to be bad, so please take public transportation. Accommodation will fill up quick and get expensive, so book your accommodation early before prices increase. Think about if you want to stay at a hotel. Consider a hostel if you're someone who likes to stay at hostels. That'll usually be more affordable. We have a lot of great where to stay guides on Travel Lemming, so check Travel Lemming if you're looking for accommodation in a certain area. But yeah, I would say that the key factors for success are just plan and research the way that you would for any kind of trip. Another key factor for a successful experience would be to consider women's sports. Women's sports games are usually more affordable than men's sports. For example, when I looked at tickets for the 2026 World Cup in San Francisco, tickets started at around $300 to $400 and went up to $2,000, $5,000, $7,000. That's insane. I'm not paying to go to that. I ended up volunteering at the World Cup here in San Francisco and got to go to the games for free, but that is a story for another time. However, when I went to the Women's World Cup in 2023 in Australia, I paid for a ticket package that had 4 games in Sydney. It had the round of 16, the quarterfinal, the semifinal, and the Women's World Cup final. Guess how much I paid for that 4 tickets to knockout round games at the Women's World Cup?
I don't know, like $200.
Wrong. $80.
That's crazy.
That's $20 a game. And yes, I could talk for a while about how we need to invest more into women's sports, but you're getting a lot of the same vibe. Like, all of those games were sold out. They were played in stadiums of 80,000 people, the same stadiums that the men play in. And it's just as fun and just as exciting and way more affordable.
So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but how does sports travel differ for you from just generic going on a trip somewhere?
I have way more fun. I have had the most memorable experiences of my life when I've been traveling for sports. My top 3 favorite travel experiences were the 2018 World Cup when I was in Croatia, and then the 2023 World Cup when I was in Australia, and then being at the Australian Open also in Australia. Those by far have become my favorite memories, and it's because sports make travel about the people, not just about the landmarks or the food or the museums. It humanizes a country and you really get to know the local vibe. I guess the best example of this would be when I was in Sydney for the World Cup. There was a game that we didn't have tickets to, but it was when the Australian team was playing. And so since we were in Australia, we knew that we wanted to go to a bar to watch this match because we thought, okay, everyone else is going to also be in. Like, it's when you're in the US and you go to a bar to watch the US team play. Like, it's crowded. It's awesome. So we made our way to a little pub in downtown Sydney, and we got there early. The pub was packed. Everyone was there to watch Australia play France in the 2023 World Cup. It ended up being the world record for the longest penalty shootout in any World Cup, men's or women's. For context, like I like sports. I like the Australia team. I think they're fun. I know a few of the players, but I'm not like a passionate fan. I was in this bar with 40 other passionate fans, and it just like I got swept up in all the excitement. We ended up watching the whole game when Australia took the winning penalty after like 10 minutes of penalties where everyone in the pub is just like buzzing with nervousness, and someone bought me a beer and was like, cheers, like we got this. When it came time for them to take the winning shot, like, and they won, everyone was screaming, everyone was jumping up and down. I got so many hugs from random people around me. Like, it was just, I felt so involved, and just like I had made a bunch of new friends and we all cared about the same thing. It's because I just leaned into the vibe of where I was, and I just went to go to watch an Australia game because I was in Australia, and it's to this day one of my favorite memories of all time.
Yeah, sports definitely have a way of making you feel like you're a part of something much bigger than yourself. And I love that story. You really became a part of the Australian community there. My boyfriend tells me the story about how he was in a pub in London when it was England versus Iceland, and Iceland had never qualified, I don't think. And Iceland beat England, and everyone in the bar was very heated. And my boyfriend was rejoicing because he really wanted England to lose. And it was just like this ridiculous circumstance that, like, what are the odds that he ends up being at a bar in London during this crazy game where the underdogs won? So he always tells me that that was one of the most memorable parts of his travels through Europe in 2018 as well.
I think that just points to one of the best things about sports is you never know when you're going to witness a historic event. Like when you're traveling and if I'm traveling to a new country and I'm going and I'm seeing the sites, like it is things that likely, God willing, will still be there in like 5 years. Like it's okay, I'm going to see this Roman ruin that has been there for literally 2,000 years. Like that is important, absolutely. But you could also go to a game and you could watch something that's never happened before happen, where this like tiny team, this underdog beats this other team, and then all of a sudden that's a game that everyone is talking about for the next like God knows how long,
20
and you
years.
get to say I was there and it was amazing. I think that's the coolest thing about sports is you never know when something absolutely insane is going to happen, and it just makes your trip that much more memorable.
Yeah, you can literally witness history in the making.
You can literally witness history.
What are some of the upcoming major sporting events around the world that listeners should be on the lookout for in the coming years?
Well, the thing that I am most excited for is the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil is next summer, so about a year from now. I am so stoked for this. Some other sports events that people should have on the horizon is the 2028 LA Olympics. Tickets are already going quite fast for this, so I'm not sure if now is an okay time to buy tickets, but if you have your tickets, yay, we'll see you in LA. If not, maybe look into some resale and see if that's something that you could get. We didn't really touch on that throughout this podcast at all, but it is possible to get resale tickets to major tournaments. You just probably will pay a little bit more, and be really careful about which ticketing platforms you're buying off of, because there is a ton of scammers. Just buy off of a verified resale platform if you're going to buy resale.
Yeah.
So 2028 summer LA Olympics, that's going to be very excited. Betty, are you going to any of the matches? I know you live in LA.
Yes, I am, actually. We signed up for we actually got put into the lottery before anybody else because we have an LA zip code. So we got really lucky and got a ton of tickets. They allowed us to buy 12 tickets per person. Now I think there's some restrictions on which events you can buy a certain amount for, but we got tickets to beach volleyball. It was only $80 a ticket, which is not bad for...
Not bad.
It was men's volleyball. Women's was way more expensive, or like double the price. So we were like, we're not like massive volleyball fans. So I was like, I just want to watch it. So we got the cheapest we could get. And then we got basketball tickets. We're hoping to see the US team because we are huge basketball fans. And that was about $200. Still not as bad as we thought it would be. And then track was $400 a piece. Yeah. Track's going to be a big one. But, you know, we were like, we live here. It's literally like so many of these events are being held at SoFi Stadium and Intuit Dome, which is like 15 minutes from us. So when are we going to be living somewhere where the Olympics are held again? And I think, you know, for a lot of Americans, I think it's probably a lot more accessible to come to the LA Olympics too than maybe another country. So I do think if you live in America, you should think about coming to the LA Olympics just because, you know, domestic travel is probably going to be way cheaper than if you were going to another country. And it's going to be It's going to be a wild time. LA is trying to complete all these projects beforehand. I don't know how they're going to get done with all this stuff, like this inner city train and the train to the airport. It's crazy, but yeah, we're really excited for it. So if you're coming to the LA Olympics, let me know in the comments. I'll come see you.
I am so glad that LA is finally making strides to improve their public transportation. I think it's comical
Finally.
that it's taken the Olympics to make them get better at trains, but
It's
here we
insane.
are.
It's insane. Well, and it's like, what did they do with the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics? Like, why has it taken 40 years for them to figure this out? But it's okay. I digress. Are you going to be going to that too, Laura? We're not too far from you in San Francisco.
I don't know that I'm going to attend the 2028 LA Olympics. I did not end up getting a very good lottery slot. And so a lot of the tickets for the events that I was excited to see were either too expensive or completely sold out by the time I did get into the lottery. So it was a tough ticket drop. I'm debating if maybe I want to buy a ticket to like go see surfing or go see like women's field hockey or kind of some random events. So maybe if I decide that it's worth it to spend the money and travel down there for an event that I like don't particularly care about, then maybe I'll go.
Well, like you've said throughout this episode, I think sometimes when you go to something and it's really unexpected and you're not really sure what you're getting into, a lot of times you'll discover that you have the best time of your life with those diehard fans for a sport that you barely know anything about, and you end up having a great time. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like the Olympics are such a special worldwide event. They bring so many people together. So I feel like you should come no matter what. Even if you go to something where you're like, I've never watched this in my life. And listeners, I think the same for you. I think you should absolutely come on over.
This is true. You're telling me to take my own advice, which is
Exactly.
right. I should go to the LA Olympics.
You should. We're so close. You have to.
Some of the other sports events that I'm really excited for and would recommend anyone to keep on their radar. Any of the tennis opens. This happens every year. You have Wimbledon in June in England. You have the French Open in Paris in May. You have the US Open in New York in September. And you have the Australian Open in Melbourne, Australia in January. So it's yearly. There's 4 a year. They are kind of expensive to go to if you want to get a really good seat for a really big match. The cool thing about any of the tennis opens are that you don't have to go to a specific match. It's actually like 10 different games being played at the same time, all in one big stadium area. So you can just walk around and see kind of newer or not as famous tennis players playing in any of these. And we actually, when we were at the Australian Open, got to see this young girl who was coming up in the tennis scene. We got to see her play at one of the free courts that we just walked up to, and she won the French Open this year. So that just shows you that if you go and you pay like $50 for a ticket to any of the tennis opens, you can just have a great time, have your little cocktail in the sun, go watch a bunch of tennis, and then 2 years later, you might have seen someone who's now the greatest tennis player in the world. Who knows? And then the last event that I would say to keep on your radar is the Rugby World Cup. For any rugby fans, I am not a rugby fan, but I think it's a really cool game. The Rugby World Cup will be in Australia in the fall of 2027. I honestly might take this as an excuse to go back to Australia just because the rugby culture there was so fun and so exciting. And I would love to go back for another major tournament because I think they do a great job at hosting tournaments. So keep that on your radar. Fall 2027 Rugby World Cup in Australia.
All right. All great things to mark on your calendar, listeners. So, Laura, what is the biggest reason people should travel for sports?
If you believe, like I do, that travel is about people, then sports are the quickest way to make friends and immerse yourself into a new country's cultural spirit. And sports can be used to showcase national pride, but they can also unify those from different backgrounds. You're watching with thousands of other fans, and it just made me immediately feel like I was part of a community, even in a new country that I had just stepped foot in. And so this distinction between tourist and local really does go away when you're at a big sports event.
All right, listeners. Well, that's all for today. Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed today's show. Also, check out travellemming.com to read Laura's article on traveling for sports, as well as dozens of guides that she's written on her home in San Francisco and her world travels. Links are in the show notes. Thanks again for being here, Laura. Listeners, we'll see you next time on the Travel Lemming podcast.